Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the basics of ant keeping. In the previous episode, we discussed how to keep an ant colony. If you didn't manage to catch it, I'll leave a link for it in the description below. But in today's episode, we are going to be talking about feeding ants and their specific dietary requirements. Now, ants in the wild get required resources in a number of ways, from simply hunting down other insects, cultivating fungus, or even farming aphids. As there are so many types of ants, there are lots of different ways they all gather food. It is up to you as the ant keeper to meet these requirements and provide your ants with the best possible food. This initially means doing your research. Find out what ants you have and the specific diet they require. Feeding your ants is simply broken down into three separate sections: protein, sugar, and water. Protein is required for the colony's development. It is fed to both the young larvae and the queens of the colony. The larvae require it to grow and the queens require it to create and lay eggs. So if you hope to expand your colony, protein will be a key element. Sugar is used by the adult workers. Seeing as the workers will no longer grow, they don't require the amount of protein used by the larvae and the queens. But as they are constantly going about their business, they need a continuous source of carbohydrates. And this is where sugar comes in handy. Water is probably the most important resource to ants, as like us, they need a continuous and daily supply of it. So now you know the dietary requirements for ants, you're probably thinking, what do I feed them to meet these requirements? Well, we'll start with proteins. Ants which have a general protein diet of just insects will tend to eat what's known as live foods, which are other insects. You can acquire these at your local pet shop or online, and you will want to pick live foods like crickets, mealworms, waxworms, cockroaches, and flightless fruit flies. You can also purchase these frozen or dried. In some cases, these are better than live foods as there is next to no chance they will carry any harmful mites or parasites. But we'll talk about that in a minute. The size and type of insects you purchase should correspond with the size of your ants, their colony numbers, and perhaps their picky appetites. For example, my yellow crazy ants won't eat anything protein related, unless it is either waxworms or cockroaches, and my previous Asian jumping ant colony wouldn't eat anything unless it was smaller than they were. You just have to do your research and perhaps test the waters to see what insects your ants prefer. In terms of preparing your feeder insects, some ants are quite picky. You can either serve them live, whole dead, or finely chopped. When feeding ants live insects, you want to keep them as small as possible. Some great examples of small insects for live feedings are micro crickets and flightless fruit flies. Anything larger could potentially damage or kill your ants. Whole dead insects are normally fine in terms of sizes. You just have to bear in mind that some insects have a thick outer skeleton, which basically acts as an armor, and some ants may struggle to get through it. Some mealworms and cockroaches have such a thick outer shell that ants will completely avoid eating them altogether. But probably the best way of preparing feeder insects is by finely chopping them. Ants can drink the nutritious fluid that leaks out of the insect and easily move them to their hungry larvae. Now, back onto the subject of harmful mites and parasites. Obviously, there is a very low chance that your live foods will be infested, but if you wanted to be safe, you can either boil them for 10 seconds before preparing them. This would essentially kill both the insect and any harmful parasites it may be carrying, or you can thoroughly check the insect beforehand. External mites and parasites may look like the following. You will want to use a pair of tweezers to remove these. As well as eating insects for protein, some ants will also eat seeds. These are referred to as granivore species. These unique type of ants collect seeds and bring them back to the nest to be ground up into an edible ant bread. Favoured seeds among these ants are normally chia, sesame, poppy and sunflower seeds. If you need to buy some for a granivore species you have acquired, I'd recommend buying ones for human consumption. If you buy a seed mix which is specifically for birds, you may find that the seeds haven't been sterilized and may contain grain mites. These grain mites feed on the seeds, rendering them useless to the ants. There are also ants which feed on a specific fungus for protein. These are usually referred to as leafcutter ants. These ants will collect leaves or grass and bring them back to their nest to cultivate a fungus. This fungus then secretes an enzyme which provides the ants with both protein and sugar. Commonly accepted are privet, bramble, spotted laurel, and oak leaves for these species. They also accept dried foods like almond flakes, rice and lentils as an occasional treat. Please don't purchase live plants or leaves from suppliers unless you are 100% certain they haven't been treated with any fungicides or insecticides, as these will either kill the fungus the ants create or the ants themselves. The best thing you can do is locate one or two of these plants around your neighbourhood or in a local forest and pinch a few leaves that way. Obviously, don't take leaves from your neighbour's privet bush without their permission. Perhaps ask if you can have the clippings the next time they trim it back. Okay, let's talk about sugar. This can be provided in many different forms. The most common and easiest method is by mixing sugar with distilled water. The ratio of the mixture is up to you, but bear in mind if you mix in too much sugar, it could over-thicken the mixture into a syrup consistency. This can either make it undrinkable or a death trap for ants who get stuck. Too much water in the mixture is also not recommended, as ants may avoid it completely. I'd recommend keeping the ratios at 25% sugar and 75% distilled water. Some ants will also accept natural sugars from fruits, honey, and tree syrups. You can obviously try a variety of fruits to see what your ants like. I'd recommend cutting up some fruits, as ants have a tendency to burrow to the cores, which may cause escapees when you need to remove them. When giving ants honey and tree syrups, you have to keep an eye on them, as some ants have a tendency to get stuck. You will want to refrain from diluting these in water, as it will promote an unhealthy amount of bacteria. You can obviously pick up various ant nectars and prepared juices from the ant keeping market. These are great as they have been safely tested out on various ants already. Ants who feed on seeds and fungus both get sugars from these sources of food, but you should always supply an additional source of sugar regardless. So now that you know what ants need to eat to thrive in a captive environment, you are probably wondering how you will do this and where. Well, firstly, when you keep ants in captivity, you will supply them with a foraging area or outworld. This basically represents an ant's world above ground, and it is where they will do all their foraging for food. When it comes to serving up your protein sources like insects, you can either drop these in as they are or place them on a serving dish, which acts as a plate. Sugary liquids can be served up in tiny droplets on a serving dish, or perhaps placed in a liquid feeder. I highly recommend liquid feeders as they are much lower maintenance. You can provide your ants with water by simply hydrating their setup and by adding additional test tube setups to their foraging areas. If you don't know how to do this, be sure to watch the first episode of the Basics of Ant Keeping, where this is fully covered. Okay, now we're going to move on to the subject of timings and quantities. How often do you feed your ants and how much? Well, this comes down to a lot of variables, like how big your colony is or perhaps how big your ants are. I'll put it simply, you should always feed your ants the same quantity of food, but increase the amount of times you feed them as they grow in numbers. For example, when a Lasius colony is young in size and has between 10 and 100 workers, feeding them 2 chopped mealworms every 3 days is a good schedule to go by. But once they start going past the 200-300 worker mark, you need to increase the amount of times you feed them to perhaps every 2 days. It is better to increase the amount of feedings you do rather than the quantity of food. A larger ant, like Camponotus, would require more frequent feeding as they need a higher amount of protein for brood development. So perhaps you could start by feeding them every 2 days and move forward from there. At the end of the day, your ants will give you a good indicator as to whether they have had their fill. If you find ants collecting everything on their serving dishes within an hour, by pretty much wiping it clean, you might have to increase the amount of times you feed them. On the other hand, if you find your ants leaving a lot of food or perhaps not touching it, it may be an indicator to feed them less. Like a lot of ant keepers, you'll have to observe your ants and see how they react to certain foods and the quantities you provide them. I know this is a lot of information and can come across complicated, but it's seriously not. Once you figure out what your ants like, either by researching it or testing it, feeding them is easy. Although this may be a tutorial on feeding ants, we will never fully cover every ant's diet. Some ants even eat pollen, bird feces and vertebrate urine to sustain themselves. So yeah, it's quite a diverse spectrum of diets. I guess it mostly comes down to you guys doing your research and testing to see what your ants like. One thing you can do is keep a logbook for your colonies. This way you can track their feeding and hydration schedules to stay on top of their various requirements. If you fancy getting one, I'm currently selling my own ant keeping logbooks. You can check them out in the link in the description down below. But if getting your head around feeding your ants seems overwhelming at all, and you need help, don't be shy to comment down below with any questions. I thought I would quickly mention before we end the video that I have just opened up my own Discord server called the Colony of Ants Britannia. Once you join, you can rank up through the colony from a simple egg to a mighty queen, just by interacting with your fellow ant keepers. It is a great place to chat with other people who share a passion for ant keeping and get helpful tips and tricks. If you are interested, I'll leave a link for it in the description down below. I do hope you enjoyed this video, guys, and found it educational. As always, you take care, and I will see you in the next one.